Joining me now is Terri Butler, Labor member for Griffith in Queensland. Good morning.
Good morning.
Modelling reported this morning shows that the budget has slid into a $51 billion, let's call it a black hole. Is this a budget emergency?
Well, look, I think that what you're seeing is the consequence of the way that this government's been managing the economy. You don't have such a worsening budget position unless you also have significant unemployment increase going along with it. And we've also seen the slowest period of wages growth on record since the wage price index started being kept in the 1990s. Now, those things are going to affect revenue. Of course, commodity prices are going to affect revenue as well. You've got this government that's come into office and has not done enough to address the revenue side of the budget. For example, what have they done to create a jobs plan to make sure that unemployment would be tackled? Not much. In fact, all their jobs plan seems to have been is to send jobs offshore. What have they done on corporate tax avoidance? Well, there's $1.1 billion worth of measures that they've foregone that they could have continued with. You've got a government that came in, obviously had a very ideological view towards the budget. You saw that macroeconomics referred to some of the budget measures as just being rats and mice that the government should drop to focus on structural reform. Of course, these things like the GP co-payment is much more ideological than it is about being sensible in terms of the budget. The GP co-payment, I think, is a classic because it's money that they want to levy for ideological reasons, because for some reason they don't think that people value healthcare, even though they haven't come up with a shred of evidence around that. Without the money, going back into consolidated revenue, with it going to fund this new medical research fund, it just stinks of ideology, not pragmatic approach to managing the budget.
But isn't the government struggling with the same thing Labor faced here, which is having to write down revenue forecasts because of changing global conditions?
Of course, global conditions are changing. That's self-evident. But a prudent government would have, in its first budget, worked out a moderate approach to the budget that it would have been able to negotiate with crossbenchers, with the opposition, in the best interests of the nation. You don't come in, start throwing your weight around, chucking on new petrol taxes, dummy spitting when you don't get your way on the petrol tax, rushing it through by regulation, getting rid of revenue measures, not enacting other revenue measures around corporate tax avoidance, and putting in these just purely ideological changes like the GP co-payment. I mean, it just stinks of arrogance to me and of ideology, not pragmatism.
When the government was in opposition and Labor faced revenue write-downs because of changing global economic conditions, they did what the opposition's doing now and blamed the government in their response. Wouldn't it be helpful to the Australian public and for both sides of politics to acknowledge that we're living through uncertain times and sometimes governments can't control their budgets due to external factors?
Well, we've been really clear about the need for honesty in budgetary reporting. The Shadow Treasurer has made announcements in respect of budget transparency. You saw the pre-election fiscal outlook process last year. We're not in a position of saying let's just close our eyes to what's happening in the world. Far from it. And if you look at the way the different parties responded to the global financial crisis, you'll see that we said, all right, we've got to take serious action here to respond to the global financial crisis. We've got to have stimulus. We've got to have stimulus in households. We've got to have stimulus in companies. We have to actually take action. And you know what the Conservative side of politics response was. The fact is, Labor has always been in a position of saying, let's open our eyes to the global realities. But we took a pragmatic approach at that time. The government should be taking a pragmatic approach and should be having an honest conversation with the Australian people. Scary language like budget crisis is just that. It's just intended to strike fear into the hearts of Australians. It's pretty galling, actually, when the Prime Minister comes into the House and says, oh, now we want a mature debate about tax. In a situation where he has for 20 years been casting aspersions and engaging in negative politics that undermines the entire nation's confidence in democracy. I mean, you see the Lowy Institute poll this year that shows that a large number of people don't have any faith in democracy at all, and a lot of that is to do with the way that the negative politics have been played by the Conservatives, and particularly their number one Mr Negative, Tony Abbott. So we have very much been about having an honest conversation with the Australian people about the way the budget works and what revenue factors are affecting the budget, and we've been very clear about the global financial crisis, our response to it. This government should do the same. They should stop with the ideology. They should stop with the nonsense policies like the GP tax, and they should actually talk with the Australian people in an honest conversation. Not this sort of sneaky, come into the budget, cut $80 billion in an attempt to force the states to back a GST rise that nobody wants. That's sneaky behaviour. That's not open and honest behaviour. You know what? Maybe they should be talking to us about what they're going to do on corporate tax avoidance a little bit more. I know Joe Hockey likes to talk about that generally, but so far it's been a lot more talk than action as far as I can gather. And I've certainly had international anti-poverty organisations get in touch with me. I had the Anti-Poverty Foundation from the UK get in touch and say, please, if there's anything that you can do to get Australia to join the early adopters group for the Common Reporting Standard against in an attempt to tackle multinational tax evasion, please do it, because Australia is not joining that group. Now, when we're the president of the G20, which has as one of its goals base erosion and profit shifting, reducing base erosion and profit shifting, then it looks pretty embarrassing for us to be dragging the chain when it comes to multinational tax avoidance.
Well, let's continue on that issue. How confident are you that the government and the G20 can secure agreement on tackling this issue?
Well, we know that there is a massive call for this issue to be tackled. You've probably seen the reports that Liberal voters in Joe Hockey's own electorate don't think that the government's done enough to crack down on multinational tax evasion. And as I've already said to you this morning, there's clearly an issue when a new government comes in and there are revenue measures on the table for them that they then don't proceed with, that go to the heart of this corporate tax evasion issue. It's about $1.1 billion worth of measures. But, you know, in this space, in the space of multinational tax evasion, of course it's difficult. Of course it's difficult when you have multinational companies shifting their profits offshore in an attempt to avoid paying tax here in Australia. But we know the extent of the problem because there have been some really good reports commissioned, and I've certainly had a number of anti-poverty groups talking to me about those reports. The question is, what can the government do? The Common Reporting Standard, joining the early adopters group like so many other countries have done, is an obvious example that the government could be doing that it hasn't done. We're hearing from David Cameron this week in the Parliament. I assume that there'll be some discussion about multinational tax evasion in that address because I think most countries realise that this is an issue that needs to be dealt with in a serious way. It's one of it's such a big challenge. You know, we have, from our perspective here in Australia, when there's hits to revenue, that means that the budget is not in as good a position as it ought to be to fund our services like health, like education, like our defence force. And for developing countries that rely on a fair share of taxation to lift their people out of poverty, multinational tax evasion must seem grossly immoral. And that's the point, I think, that has been made across all of the consultations that I've been engaged with.
Now, a Senate committee has called for parliamentarians to be granted a free vote on the issue of euthanasia. Do you support that call? And if a free vote came before Parliament, what way would you vote?
Well, I'm not sure it's for the Senate committee to be telling people whether or not they should have a free vote, but I would say this. The Liberal Party is supposedly the party of a free vote. I mean, it's something that they like to talk about, the fact that they're not bound and they can cross the floor if they want to without ramifications. And yet you see a Prime Minister who's preventing Liberal Party members from voting in favour of marriage equality at this point in time. And Tanya Plibersek's got a marriage equality bill that she says she will move in as soon as there is a Liberal seconder for the bill. In other words, once there is a free vote. But on the broader question of euthanasia, I'm on the record as having said before, subject to seeing the detail of the bill, in principle, I would like to support people being able to die with dignity.
And so do you think the Liberal Party and the Labor Party should grant their members a free vote on this issue?
I think that there should be a free vote on this issue in the Liberal Party because that's what they claim to stand for. I think that Labor, if we are to have conscience votes on matters of conscience like abortion, like stem cell research, then why not a conscience vote on euthanasia? I think it's a matter for our national conference from conference to conference what there is a free vote on. But I'd like to think that we would have, and I'm sure we would have, a genuine, thoughtful and constructive debate about this very important issue. Anyone who has seen someone towards the end of their life when they're suffering from cancer or from another number of terrible diseases, I think would like to have a mature and constructive discussion about how we help people end their life with dignity.
Okay, Terri Butler, thanks for your time.
Thank you.